Hi everyone, my name is Chris. I'll be your moderator today for today's product management panel, which is called What's the Product Manager Life Like? So with me today I have two fantastic product managers, Dan Weiss here at the end, and Richa is how it's pronounced. Richa is a senior product manager for Kaiser Permanente, and Dan is a product manager with Boeing. So, with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and jump in and begin the panel. So just to give you guys like a quick understanding of what's going to happen, I'm going to ask a few questions. We'll give each of them an opportunity to respond. Once we get to the end of the questions, we'll open up to the audience. That way you guys can have your questions ready for Richa and Dan. Awesome. So first question. To you, Richa, how did you get into product management?
So when I think about this question, how I got into product management, actually I have been a product manager by heart since the time that I can think about. I have always been somebody who looks, when I look at any experience or any product, I think about what is the purpose that is serving, or what's the gap that exists that it's filling, or how it is even enhancing member experience. If I look back, and even when I was 12 years old, in one of the summer breaks, I saw that there was a need to open for a library, a comic library. And I, along with my two younger siblings, we opened a library, and because we had a huge stack of comics, and also we had some money in our piggy banks, we got it together, we thought that we'll buy new comics, and which we'll get to read, and also then we can share it with people. It looks like all the kids are excited to have have comics. And we started doing that for that summer break, and then we realized that there were kids' moms who were interested in some magazines, and they were like, wow, can you bring us some magazines too? And I was like, wow, my mom has a huge pile of magazines, then probably we can start renting those out too. So this is how I have always thought. In one of my roles when I even came, when I was at Microsoft Consulting in Business Value Realization Lead, I was in Office of CIO and working with all these new products or projects or proposals that were coming in, and how to think about the business value of those projects. And the idea was to define business value and what are going to be those business success criteria, how are we going to measure it, what are those KPIs going to be, and thinking about that, just doing that with the incoming projects. And as I worked with all these product leads to do that, I realized that they were just doing it more so as check the box activity. Like they were not, their heart was not in it. And I was like, when I'm doing something, I just don't want to do it to fill out spreadsheet and make sure that I completed my job. Why is it that people are not willing to do this? And then I found out the gap that existed, and there was a need to redefine that process. So, and then from there to in my current role, also looking for those gaps that exist. I think this answer got longer than I expected it to be. I just want to get that intent across, that product management doesn't happen, but it's just that something that is always in you. It is just that you relish it a little bit more. You kind of continue to work on that a little bit more, and then you, irrespective of the title that you are in, irrespective of the role that you are in, but you are just a product manager, because that is the lens with which you view everything. What is the gap that exists? How can I change this experience? How can I bring efficiency in this process? And that doesn't need for you to be titled as a product manager.
Dan, same question.
I'm gonna piggyback off you a little bit. I think that's right, that a lot of becoming a product manager is the framing of your current task. Like there's product management and product management related work, and I think basically any job that's that anyone does, basically, it's framing that as, okay, I'm working in this product fashion, and trying to apply product management principles to that role. And so I think that will tie in to answer the question directly. So that was part of the way that I got into product management, is that, so I work for Boeing, and I have an electrical engineering background, but pretty quickly realized that this product discipline was very interesting to me. And so I started looking for opportunities in my day-to-day job, and then sort of as I started day-to-day job to work on these product management principles, validating things with users, testing risky assumptions, releasing a small thing and seeing how it goes, looking at data, getting user feedback, et cetera, et cetera. And then from there, as I started sort of gaining a little bit of momentum there, I started getting some more opportunities within the company to sort of define something in a larger capacity. But so in addition to sort of trying to shape my role, that was, you know, some other role at the company initially, into this product-y type role, I also started doing, once I had a little bit more experience, I actually went through product school. So it worked for me. At a certain point, I started having enough product experience that I could consult as a product manager. And so I started consulting just with little startups and things like that. And a lot of times I did just pro bono work for free. But it was really just hustling. I mean, I contacted a ton of different startups. I was in LA at the time. Eventually someone is like, yes, I will take free labor, right? So, you know, and you start there, and I started sort of developing some rapport in the product management community in Los Angeles, and eventually it sort of led to just incrementally over time into sort of an official product management role. That's what's so hard about getting into product management, is that no one wants to hire someone who doesn't have product management experience, but you can't get product management experience until someone hires you to do the role. And that's I had a whole presentation on the chicken and egg of the product management hiring process. But so that's how I got into it.
Awesome. Thank you both for sharing. Fantastic stories. And Dan, to you again. What are some things you love about being a product manager?
I think there's there's a lot of things I love about product management. I'm just my personality, I love to explore, I'm super inquisitive, and I love to sort of synthesize things and understand things. And what I love about product management is that it's a role that I can do me at work. Anyone who knows me knows that I ask a ton of questions, I'm hyper inquisitive, and I can do that at work and it helps, right? So it doesn't, you know, end up causing problems or whatever it is. Meaning that my inherent personality, I think, fits really nicely into the role, and that's nice, to be able to sort of be myself and use my inherent skills in a role, so I love that about the role. I also love, even though it makes the role very difficult, product managers typically don't have any inherent authority in organizations, right? There's not hierarchical authority, so product manager says to whoever, do this. It all comes from a place of influencing and understanding different perspectives, empathy, understanding user and business need, and sort of working all that stuff together to find solutions and compromises that work for everyone. And even though that is incredibly difficult and can be very, very frustrating, I like that effort. I like doing that. I like trying to find solutions that work for large swaths of people. And ultimately, I think that process of working in that way ends up resulting in higher quality, better products for end users. So those are two things I really enjoy about product management.
And Richa, what are some things you love about being a product manager?
What I really love about being in this position is the ability to drive impact. Is how, as a product manager, I have that authority to, or that I'm in that capacity to bring all this data, metric, customer experiences, strategic goal, long-term vision together and tie it and make it something tangible that is actually going to move the needle. So as a product manager, you are the one who's solely responsible for driving that vision forward and making that tangible, and that is really exciting for me to be in that capacity.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. A tough one for you. What are some things that frustrate you as a product manager? No, toss up. Go ahead.
Frustrate me as a product manager. That's an excellent one. There are good days and then there are super bad days too. But the frustration comes, as Dan was mentioning, right? You do not have any direct authority, and that can become sometimes very frustrating, especially in larger organizations where your progress is dependent upon a lot of different teams and systems, and that friction, that unnecessary friction hampers the pace at which you can advance. So you have to hustle a lot of times. A lot of times you have to be very creative in how you get your voice across. How can you get that air cover from leadership, and how can you make sure that you have some solid exec sponsor for what you're trying to do, and you can put their weight in front of when you need to move forward. So there are some creative ways that what you can leverage when you have to move forward, but that sometimes becomes very frustrating because as a product manager, the success of your product is in bringing everybody together, but for everybody to come together, it's a challenge to bring everybody together. That becomes sometimes very frustrating.
That resonates with me. I think even though it's a tremendous opportunity to be able to sort of coordinate everything and bring people together and synthesize these different viewpoints to ultimately deliver value, it can be very frustrating. My colleague Chester knows that. It can be, yeah, that can be a very challenging component. I think, Chris, you and I were talking about this before we started. I think something that's really frustrating to me is when people resist or are not, don't feel comfortable allowing a product team to have access to users. I think that it's so difficult to to deliver a successful product when you don't know who you're building it for. And a lot of times on a product team, it can create a lot of frustration. It can hurt morale, and ultimately, everyone sort of knows in the back of their head that you're taking on a lot of risk in doing it this way. But it's difficult when, I guess I'm going back to stakeholders, but if you have stakeholders who are, and I'm living this now, who are limiting that access to user, or, at Boeing we have situations where, I've had situations where there's compliance problems with access to users, or you have people on like a flight line, and it's just you cannot get those access to users. It can be very frustrating. I think you said it well earlier, you're just in the dark. So I think that's one of the worst parts of it. Can be a very painful piece of being a product manager.
And just to add to that, as Dan was saying, it's hard to bring that mentality out of people that it's not you versus I. It is about that big picture. We are all working for that one goal, and we are all on the same goal. We are not different people, different teams. It's not your success versus my success. We are all working towards this. And how can we bring transparency in this so that we can work in a more cohesive manner, rather than getting that into that barrier?
And I think that it's at smaller companies you see resistance to, you see sort of what you're saying, but at these larger companies you really do see it. You see the defending of territory, or this us versus them mentality. I do think that smaller companies are better aligned towards a single vision and ultimately understand where the money is coming from and who's paying for it. And so it's like when you're inhibiting that, you're inhibiting the success of that company. When you're at these larger companies, it's not so clear where things come from, so it can be a little bit more, you can see how that type of situation can arise, yes. I think. There's conflicting priorities.
Yes.
Great responses. Yeah, as a product manager, I definitely agree with like everything you guys are saying. Spot on. So thank you.
I'm glad.
Yeah. So how has your role as a product manager evolved over time from year one to now?
Yeah.
Okay. It's evolved a lot. I was actually, so we got these questions before, so I put some time into thinking about how I wanted to answer them. I think there's sort of two parts to the evolution of the role. The first is that there are product managers who stay with the same products for many, many years. But so the role evolves inevitably, or is going to be different over time, because you're going to work on different products, right? And even though product management, the outline of it is always sort of the same, it's very different depending on what company you go, depending on what team you go, depending on the type of product you're working on. So I think my role has evolved over time in the sense that I've just been on these different teams, right? And different teams have needed different things. The second thing is that I'm now in a role where I'm teaching in addition to working as a product manager, and so that's an interesting sort of shift in how I'm working, because there's this additional element of sort of explaining and articulating why it is I'm doing the things I'm doing, not just doing them, which I actually think is a really healthy exercise, because a lot of times, my peers will catch me and be like, well, that doesn't really make a lot of sense, Dan. And I'm like, you're right. So,
So yeah, my role evolved over time. So first I was product manager for a very small piece of a website that was run by a company that I worked at, and then it evolved into, it did not evolve, then I started strategically placing myself into different aspects of those product management or in a company, so being myself into a strategic role or being a PM and for a global CPE organization that I was at. So kind of getting those global experiences and local experiences, and then I was product lead for a security platform, and then I was product lead for a global platform, and right now I'm leading the strategy and portfolio for digital services. So it has evolved over time, but it has been more like well thought out progression to what are those areas where I need experience in, and what are those areas where I should put myself to get that experience, so that as I mature over time, I can bring all of that experience together and be mature as a whole over time.
Awesome. That's a really great piece to caveat that is, like, you don't want to haphazardly jump into the next product role. You should be thoughtful and intentional with where you take your career.
And I would just say to that, so I agree, and if you're, I guess what I'm saying is that you don't always have a choice, right? So yes, I think when you move companies or potentially make moves within a company, you can vet that product team and that product before you go in, but I think sometimes you can't. I don't know, I just wanted to add that nuance, but I think it's incredible that you've been able to navigate your way and be able to do that. You must be very strategic.
Yeah, what that end goal looks like. Keep that end goal in mind, and then plan everything towards it, then there are no surprises.
Right. And then a follow-up to that one is actually, like, what are the things that are kind of consistent, the themes of the product management role or your career that you just find no matter where you go, what product you're working on, like what level of fidelity or strategy you have over the product, you still end up doing these things or have these sets of responsibilities?
So the consistent theme that has been all along is looking at what the end goal looks like and then breaking it down to what should be done to meet that end goal has always been the consistent theme, irrespective of even when I was owning the small piece of that website or even when I was owning that delivery of next generation pricing platform to 191 countries. That has always been that as a product manager, you have that vision, this is where you want to go and this is how you're going to break it down, and continuously make sure that all those two pieces are in alignment and you're making progress keeping those two pieces in mind.
I second that, which is that fundamentally, to me, that's the job, is ensuring that the team is aligned and that there is, that everyone's moving in this direction and that you're guiding them in that direction. I think I would add, I've seen a common theme, which is the best products have a very comprehensive understanding of user needs, right? So the best products, the best product teams understand their users really well. And the other theme I've seen is that at no point as a product manager will you ever be able to tell someone to do something because I said so. So if you have to get used to that, because you're always trying to, you need to demonstrate the value to other people in order to get the things that you need done. At least that's the theme that I've seen.
And going back to Dan's point, that is the hardest part of being a product manager, is that you have to, because you have to bring so many people together, the only way for you, because you can't put your weight around, you are just a product manager. So you have to bring that, you have to, as I was saying, right, be creative and find out all that data or that supports it, that shows that no, it is not me who's saying it, look at this information that I have it here, and this is the reason that you should come along and do this or get behind this product that or the program that I'm launching. So yes.
And I would add that it's very difficult, but it's also that I think the best product managers do this this act of gaining alignment in a sustainable way, right? Like there's way to get things one time or two times, but if it's not providing value for them over a longer period of time, at a certain point they're going to sort of figure out what's going on. So it's creating these sustainable relationships, delivering value over time to these teams, and developing a rapport so that that chunk of stakeholder is no longer a resistive chunk, and that you're like, okay, we're on the same page, now I'm going to work on some other piece.
And that's a great point of clarification in addition to that as well, is as a PM, you're really just an enabler of other people doing the work, right? And to your point, sustainability is key because you never know when you're going to need to go to that person for another request, right?
And that is the work of the PM, right? To get other people working. They wouldn't work. They wouldn't work unless you let them know why they need to work.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. So, what attributes and skills do you look for in a product manager?
You ever get that?
Yeah, I guess when hiring, right? Or
you know, you were talking about quite a bit about how you are now teaching product managers. So what are some of the things, whether you're looking to hire a PM or even just looking to see whether or not this person would make a good transition into the product?
I think communication is critical. You have got to be able to, and now I'm not you've got to be able you've got to feel really confident confident communicating in different situations, in different mediums, with different types of people. So communication is, I think, a huge thing. I think that, I'm going to pass it to you and then I'm going to think more about it.
Okay. I think that the quality that I look for product and I try to work on that in myself too, be very nimble and agile. Be able to pivot very quickly because market is changing very fast, business priorities are changing really quickly, competition is changing really quickly. So you start from point A with some data and with some specifics in mind, but 3 months down the road, things may have changed or evolved. So how do you detach yourself, still being passionate about that end result and goal? So not being cold about that, you're still committed, you're still passionate, but as things are changing, you are also pivoting yourself very quickly and changing and kind of bringing that along with you. The passion still stays with you, but you bring along all this information and then change and be nimble and be very agile to the changing conditions, as I think is very important as a product manager. And I struggled with that in the beginning because things change very quickly even when I wasn't ready to change. I was like, what? We did so much work and we went behind this, and I was like emotionally connected to it, but then it was like I'm emotionally connected to the end result, to the success. That's what I should be thinking about, not how we get there, how should always change to best adapt to the changing needs.
And Dan, maybe a way to rephrase the question would be like, as Richa had said, like what skills do you see in other product managers that you would like to have, or that you strive for?
Yeah, I think something that's really important for product managers is to realize that oftentimes you're not the one defining the solution, you're facilitating the definition of the solution. So like if I'm looking for people, if you will, or looking at candidates or whatever it is, I'm looking for people who are interested in defining and scoping a problem and then facilitating the definition of that solution, not people who are interested in sort of defining that solution. I think that ties in, I think, with another piece, which is that product managers need to be very empathetic of their users and of the different stakeholders who are involved, because ultimately that empathy is the tool you use to sort of not influence, but get people to align with you, right? If you can't understand where people are coming from, if you can't understand why people are doing the things they're doing, whether it's a user or a stakeholder, I feel as though it's difficult to be successful as a product manager. And ultimately, I think one of the hardest parts, if not the hardest part, is that influencing of different stakeholders. So if you can't empathize and understand where different people are coming from, and you sort of have a way of doing things, you like to do things a certain way. So that's something I struggle with a little bit, because I can be a little, what's the expression, like a little stubborn, I guess.
Yeah.
but that's something I've worked a lot on, and in my current role, I think I've gotten a ton of exposure in understanding to how bringing empathy to these situations and how bringing empathy to these different stakeholder interactions can provide tremendous value.
And that is, again, I would like to touch a little bit more on that and emphasize on that point is, and when I said agile, that also folds in that when you talk to, as a product manager, you go with a plan, but because you talk to so many teams and so many different stakeholders and they have different view of it and they have a way to influence. So you also have to be open to their ideas and suggestions and quickly fold that in. So having that open mind that way also that, okay, probably this person. So being open to ideas and be open to fold the good ideas that are coming in and continue to change and evolve is really important. So, and which is not that easy.
I think that's 100% right. I think the other thing that's really important is an ability to lead. You don't, and I think there's an important distinction here, which is that you don't need to be, you know, a strong, dominant leader to be a good product manager. I've seen fantastic product managers. In fact, I think even better than, anyway, I've seen really excellent product managers who lead in a much different, more gentle, sort of from behind type of way. But I think fundamentally, if you don't feel comfortable or don't feel as though you have the capacity to lead people or to help people move in a certain direction, however you do that, I think that it's difficult to be a really successful product manager.
Yeah, and to kind of add to that, leadership, the way I think about it is and the way I see a lot of people think about leadership as a product manager is the ability to kind of get everyone moving in the right direction by taking the first step for them, right? And letting them follow you along this path. Even if you're the only person that's there initially, if you keep walking, you keep, you know, climbing the mountain, eventually people will rally around you and then you'll get all the support you need and at the end they will carry you to the top, is what I've experienced in my career. So yeah, and the other thing about leadership that I've heard from a lot of product management experts is that being able to step in and help the team solve a problem, but then also removing yourself. That way you're not leading and like getting in the way, if you will. Yeah. So I think that's a really great point about leadership.
And teams are very possessive about their turfs. So they want to facilitate, they want you to kind of bring to get the teams together, but then they also want you to take a step back where you are not needed. So as a product manager, especially given I have engineering and MBA background, and I understand all the conversations when engineering has it and when business has it, it's hard for me to kind of hold myself together. It's like, no, it's not my turf. Let them deal with it and probably I'll add to it when I'm asked or probably when I think is the appropriate time, but I shouldn't jump in because they are very possessive about their turfs and they understand that. It's okay, back off. We got it. Kind of.
That
Weiss PM.
Yeah, I think that balance is, it's like a role where you're on, I don't know, I'm sure people have seen, it's like a balancing board, but it's a ball underneath instead of just like a seesaw. That's like a product management job. You're always like, with everything you're doing, you're always sort of balancing and moving around a little bit. And so I think that, I guess it seems that sometimes people don't realize that it is definitely a very difficult role, but it can also be, it's not always like the most it's not necessarily like a glorified role internally. It's really like you have to get your hands dirty sometimes and do what needs to be done to sort of facilitate these situations. You have to pull your ego out of things and let the teams work. Sometimes you have to dive in and be the bad guy. You know, I was working on something recently and it's like, I'm working on this thing and people are telling me, no, this is the wrong direction to go, do it a different way. But you know, sometimes you have to be like, absolutely, I'm taking in this feedback and I do think that this feedback is valuable and helpful. And sometimes you have to say, I really think that this is distraction from the direction we're trying to go. But that's hard, to be the person alone oftentimes in a team that's the one saying no. You know, it can be difficult at times, but it's, you know, there's a lot of responsibility that comes with the role, I guess.
And I really like the way you describe being on the balancing board. That's the visual that I'll always carry in my mind because it's fun to be that balancer, but when you fall down because you are going to miss your balance, and that's not fun at times. But that's a very good way to say that.
Awesome. Switching gears a bit, what was a difficult product manager interview question you had, and how did you answer it? And I'll give you guys a moment to think about this one if you need to.
I mean, I can think about the question, but I don't remember the answer, how I went about it.
Yeah, and maybe how would you go about answering it
How would
now?
I go about it
All your
in today's
wisdom.
world? I can tell you the question because it is the question that I always remember. So I was in this company and interviewing for a product management role, and I was asked by the VP of product that how many light bulbs are there in Seattle City? And okay, I was like, I had done some research, I had done some studies because product management, this is not an anomaly or a very different question for a product manager. But I wasn't sure if I would be asked this question or such question. So getting about it was hard, but getting to that what is the population, how many schools, how many hospitals, and what are those edge cases, stadiums, and how many hospitals. So these are the questions where there is no right or wrong answer. They just want to see what's your approach like, how do you think about it, what are those areas that you consider, what are some of the specific data points that you would be looking at, and then how are you going to get to that number. That obviously that person also doesn't know what that number is, it's just a hypothetical question. But it is just to see how you break that question down in your mind and how do you go about solving that problem.
Yeah, in product interviews they pull from consulting is where I've seen it's case study questions. So that's like a case study question. And in my, so actually I'll give two. So the first is that, so there's a company actually right next door called Pivotal Labs, and they interviewed me for my job at Boeing. It's a little weird, but anyway, so they conducted my interview in their standard format. They have a really unique way of interviewing. So they basically they provided a scenario and then asked how would you develop a product. And so it's a very comprehensive, basically like an hour and a half long answer to one question. And what they're looking for, so like how, it's similar to a case study where you need to sort of frame the balance of it and then you start sort of breaking it down. But ultimately how I answered that question was using sort of product management principles and sort of fundamentals, start with user research, develop like, low fidelity prototypes, hit an MVP, things like that. So that was one question that was very challenging. I do think it was a very effective question in assessing a product manager's competency in a relatively short amount of time. I went to New York City for a product management interview with a startup there, and they asked a similar case study-like question, but I don't think they put so much thought into it. And they asked me, how would you build a GPS? And so I was like, so I have an electrical engineering background, so I was like, okay. But I was like, okay, well, do you mean like the web interface for a GPS, or like, the user experience? No. How would you build the whole GPS? I'm like, you mean the satellites and the relay? Yes, the whole thing. So, it's like, I'm like, how much time do I have? So I tried to basically, it's just, the thing about when you interview, I mean, most people have been in an interview, but when you interview someone, when you're the interviewer, I think it's really important for people to remember that like there is a person on the other side of that table or whatever it is, and that each question needs to be thoughtfully prepared to try to help them demonstrate their competency. And so in this case, I do not think that question was such a great question, sort of at least from my perspective. But so I tried to break it down in a similar way. It was just like such a crazy question. I was like,
Now that you say you were electronics and
electrical engineer, yeah.
And I was asked about this light bulb, and I have electrical engineering background, so I'm like, now I'm like, what was this? Why was I asked this question?
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you guys for sharing. Yeah, that's very insightful. And you guys both have electrical engineering backgrounds.
Yeah, it's interesting.
You said you have an MBA.
Don't have an MBA.
Don't have any. Okay.
No. And I just have to say this because I feel like in Seattle, everyone thinks it. You do not need an MBA to be a product manager.
Yeah.
Amazon wants MBAs for their product managers. There are tons of tech companies that do not care if you have an MBA for your product management, for the product management job.
Yeah.
It's just up here, it's like, Amazon's hiring a ton of product managers and they want MBAs, and so, you need an MBA to be a product manager. I just wanted to clarify, I feel like that's like a huge misconception.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of people think you need that.
Yeah.
Product management, again, is all about having that right mindset. And when you're having that conversation, and when you're even interviewing for the job, is that how you can just show that skill set
That's
that
right.
you have
Yep.
is more important than the degrees, any degree.
And I would just add is that I know I pulled us on a tangent. I get the question so often. I just want to like tell as many people as I can that people go and get their MBAs specifically to go into product management and then struggle to get product management roles after the MBAs because it's still hard to get a product manager job. So I just wanted to. Sorry, I had to.
Yeah, no, that's great. I do mentoring for like industry professionals and new graduates out of college, so I hear a lot of these stories of people going to college for product manager roles and then struggle to find a job, especially in Seattle where it's particularly competitive.
Yeah.
And you have some of the best talent in the world here, from Amazon, Google, Facebook, and the like. So yeah, that's a really great point to an interview-related question.
Yeah.
And at this time, I want to do a quick time check to see how we're doing.
We're good.
Good, awesome. And then I want to also take this time to open up to the audience and let you guys ask questions. I'm sure there's lots of things on your mind, so feel free to pose them directly to them or both. Like, yeah, and here we go.
Great. So there seems to be this really big focus on technology experience,
Sorry,
engineering,
could you,
etc.
because I think it's small enough, do you mind if
Yeah.
just you introduce
Yeah,
yourself?
what's your name?
Sure. My name is Scott Donner. I just moved to Seattle a week ago.
Welcome.
Thank you. So I'm
Go
interested in potentially changing careers. So I'm curious about the focus on technology experience, engineering, etc. I say that because my background is in UX, and I've been a UX manager for about 8 years, and I've not been a coder since I think 2004. So what's the importance of it? Is it just
For product management?
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead.
I have engineering degree, but I've never seen myself proactively using that. It helps me to sometimes ask more intricate or detailed question to engineering in discussions, but I would say that it's not a requirement at all. You can trust the engineering team, or you can just be curious and ask those questions anyways. It doesn't mean you don't have to have any technical background, but still at the same time you should have technical bent of mind.
Yeah.
You should love technology. You should just try to understand what you're working on and how that thing works, what's the platform, what are those databases, what are those data sources, like just being curious and inquisitive and kind of finding those bases of that information, but you don't have to be an engineer per se to acquire or to understand that information, because product managers are not required to go that deep. That work is left for the professionals to do that, and you're just bringing those different teams together. Thank you.
I would add is that because you have this UX background too, I've actually seen product managers shift from, so like sometimes like developers will move into product management positions, sometimes UX designers will move into product management positions, and it's actually interesting because if those individuals aren't careful, they can sort of overstep their bounds in a product team. So like if you have a developer background, you just came from a development position, and you move into a PM position, you have to empower individuals or sort of individual groups in these different teams. And if you're all over them with, well, why are you making that decision that way? And well, I would do, you don't give them their space to sort of own their part of the product. So I think in some ways, if you're not careful, a really technical background can inhibit you sometimes. The other thing, just to echo what you said, which is that I think that when I'm in meetings where we're having technical discussions, having had having my electrical engineering background and having worked as an electrical engineer for a little bit, I do have this gut about things, right? So it's, when developers are like, oh my God, isn't it take for absolutely forever? And I can look at it and say, but I don't actually say anything, right? Because it's not, like how my product teams work, or the product teams I work with work, is that sort of devs own implementation, sort of the technical side, product owns business strategy, value, and UX owns sort of the user's experience and sort of ensuring that you're providing the user value. So to sort of step on those toes wouldn't be good. But in the back of my head, I do have a gut, right? And sometimes I can ask a little bit more of like a detailed question or ask a question in a way to facilitate a conversation. But I think ultimately, many times, even the devs coming in, unless you're working in a very stable environment, devs are learning the new technology as they're going, right? Like they're pulling in new stack components and things like that. So no one knows everything off the bat. So yeah, I think if you're curious and you sort of get involved and you understand, well, where's that stuff being pulled from and whatever it is, I think it helps, but I do not think it's critical. I do think that at a certain point it's not bad for a person who has no technical experience to maybe take like part of a coding class online or something, just to like get a feel for it. The last thing I'll say is just having a technical background, sort of knowing how to code, having exposure to UX through a bunch of different avenues, I have more empathy for these different teams. So, this word just, people use just a lot, and it's like, oh, developers just changed this thing, and it's like, well, that's not so simple, and so having that exposure, I think helps me to moderate what I'm saying in that let's not make assumptions about how complicated or not complicated this is, and to let them tell me that. But yeah, long answer, but I do not think it's hyper relevant.
Yeah, and to actually add to that, as a UXer, I've worked with a lot of people that made the transition from UX into product and have been really successful, specifically for some of the reasons that they talked about, having that customer empathy. As a UX designer or researcher, you really understand customers, or most of them that I've met really do. So if you do have that, that's one of the core tenets of being a product manager. So I think you would make a really good transition into product. So yeah.
Hi everyone, my name's Arham. I'm also fairly new to Seattle. This is my 3rd week here. I've been working at Boeing with Dan for about 2 weeks now. My question is, so I've been hearing at work a lot people throw around the term PM, and I'm kind of confused as to the difference between project management and product management. So in your eyes, what is the difference, or are they the same?
So so there's project management, program management, and product management, and PM a lot of times, so PJM is used for project management. But the difference between the two is product management is looking at that product, being responsible for that product from initiation to delivery, and then even post-delivery, and collecting feedback and getting that in the loop and getting into that product cycle for the development and for the growth of that product. Program management is quote unquote is responsible for the delivery of the product. So once that product has been conceptualized, once we know what those features are, what those user stories are, they have been stack ranked, and we know now we have to go and deliver, then program manager comes in, takes that prioritized backlog or user stories, and then works with delivery teams, with engineering teams, and bringing all those different teams together for the delivery. But as a product manager, you still work very closely with the program manager throughout the cycle of development, and then once it is ready to go live, then as a product manager, you look for how it is going to go live, what that user experience is going to be, for how that readiness and landing looks like, how are we going to manage the post-launch activities, what that hypercare looks like, what that white glove treatment for our new early adopter looks like, who are our early adopters are going to be. So a product program manager works on, as a program manager is working on the delivery or the implementation or development of that product. As a product manager, you worry about the upcoming or the forthcoming activities once that product is ready to be launched. So you are kind of the Uber owner. Program manager is the owner for the delivery or for the development of that product, if we can say so.
And how would you define project?
Project manager is then if that is a large if that's a large program, then you carve out pieces. So there are those pieces that are owned by then multiple project managers for that large multi-year, multi-dimensional programs. Then there is this piece that is owned by one project manager, and there's this piece that's owned by other project managers.
It's like it's funny, I actually had someone ask me this like 2 days ago. It's funny because I thought I knew, and then you start reading more about these different roles, and it just becomes, there's more and more information that conflicts with each other. Every company basically has different definitions for these roles. So like, I mean, literally every company, the role is going to be a little bit different. Like I think at Microsoft, a program manager is more like a product manager.
Yes.
Is that, you know what I mean? So that's sort of an interesting nuance.
But that is not the, so I was going more for the function, but I agree that every company has a different definition. But if you think about the responsibilities, this is how they are different. But every company, product manager is more like a newer function. So traditional companies, they are still catching up to the new trend. Newer companies have program managers, product managers, project managers, but not the traditional companies. So it's still, that definition is very skewed, and it's based on the company that you look at.
I think that's right. Everything's sort of still stabilizing around that PM type of role and like what that is. Coming from Boeing, we do a lot of waterfall-based hardware development. So I think of project manager living in more of that space where they're like delivering something and they're done with it. They're delivering on a schedule, and their job is to make sure that things in the schedule get hit properly. It's all the coordination of that schedule. And then product manager is defining this vision and direction of the product. I think that there can sometimes be, depending on how you define project manager and product manager, there can be overlap, right, in terms of like what they might do. Project manager and product manager can work together. I think sometimes, like if you think about an agile, like a scrum master, could be maybe seen as more of like a project manager, and then they will work with, well, in Scrum it's called product owner, which is a project manager in our world and what we're talking about now. It gets really confusing. I mean, even what a product manager is, like there's heated debate about that.
So long story short, you will still be confused for some time.
Yeah, I'm still
Because there is no clear definition.
Right.
Other questions from the audience?
Actually, I would like to say that, add to that, for right now, if you were to go by my current title, it is Strategy and Portfolio Senior Program Manager. But the job that I do is more of a product manager. Is looking at what are those initiatives that are member enhancing, those are more enhancing experience on the suite of initiatives or product that we should be working on, or as a digital services our portfolio should be working on. Because again, Kaiser is another traditional company, they don't define it the way it should be defined. But so it is not about the title, but it is more about the function or the work that you do.
No, go ahead.
I think based off of that, I'm pretty curious, how do you go about defining a background that isn't defined as a product manager, but like the work is aligned with the work of a product manager very closely? So when you're looking for work, how do you go about defining those previous experiences and those previous roles, especially to potential employers, and selling yourself as a product manager with some experience, even though it doesn't show by your previous title?
Interesting.
And what's your name?
Eric?
Eric. And what do you do now?
I'm a product manager, but they don't call me that. I work for a small startup, a marketing startup in Florida. I've been in Seattle working remotely for almost a year now. But my actual title, I think, is something along the lines of creative strategy engineer.
Mm-hmm.
But I spent 3 years as a creative strategist. And the more I learned about product management, the more I see similarities into the role that I did, just on different scales. Rather than working on a single product or a single project over a longer period of time, it was more like 8 content projects in about 30 days.
So just to reiterate your question, it's how do you highlight the PM inside you that you've been doing the role without the title? How do you highlight that on your resume and get employers to take notice of that?
Yeah.
I would say that highlight the works that you have done where you have taken initiative, where you saw that a gap existed or something in your creative field. You saw that probably this is something that should be done this way, and you looked for some data. So you had some assumptions and some hypothesis, and then you looked at data, or you interviewed people, or you talked to, and it doesn't have to be like at a big scale, but in your little world, whatever you are working on, how did you support your hypothesis, and how did you bring people together that, hey, look at this, and this is how we should be doing it, and this is what the data behind it also says, and then you went on implementing it, and then depending upon and you kind of vetted your hypothesis. Is it right? Is it wrong? How did you complete that whole loop? And then after it was live, then how did you take the feedback on that again, and then continue to the iterative approach that you continue to make it better and define. And so kind of outside of your responsibilities, you went outside of the way, and that was kind of stretch goal for you, but you did that, and this is something that you can highlight. And people who, even I mentor the young aspiring PMs, is I say that do something, learning by doing. Think about maybe creating a small product, a small website, or a small app or something, of looking at around you where you think that, oh, I should create or think about this, or creating the strategy about it, how to go about it, kind of creating a 5-pager presentation, just for your own experience, and to show that this is something that you can take in your interview, and show that this is something that I saw around me, a gap in this. And it could be very simple as, I was there in Phoenix for July 4th weekend, and it was so hot there. And even like, we would wait to get even water bottle if we were going to leave it in a car for some time. It was so hot. So we were like, okay, let's just go and have lunch, and we'll come back, and then probably we'll stop at a gas station and we'll get water, because if we leave this water bottle for half an hour in the car, it would be like boiling. And medicine also, I was so reluctant to leave it in the car. I would carry it in my bag. I was like, it is going to spoil my medication, right? It was so hot. And then I was thinking about it, and I was like, how cool would it be if we designed a solar-powered small refrigerator for the cars? Right? And then we had this conversation with the kids and in the car, and talking about it, that yeah, because there's so much sunlight, and we can put those panels on the top of the car, and people can, it could be just DIY kit that people can take and do a little bit of kind of mechanics, and have a small bed. At least people can leave their water bottle and medication and stuff like that, because it was like 120 degrees. So things like that, right? And if I were to really put my heart and mind into it, I can bring this to life and probably just build a prototype. It wouldn't be really hard if I really want to do it. So, and then if I go for an interview, I can take that as an example. That I was there, this was the problem I saw, and this is how I thought about tackling it. And then also I can interview a few people in Phoenix and kind of get that hype. So this is my hypothesis, but I can also validate from people. So these are some of the ways. So as I was saying, product management is in your heart, in your brain. You are product manager. When you are a product manager, you think like that every second of your life. And sometimes you have to train your brain. If that's the route that you want to go to, not necessarily it has to be inherent, but you have to purposefully train yourself when you are having an experience, or when you are using a product, to think about those areas, that how can I improve this? What can we do more in this, or enhance, or pinpoint, right?
I agree with that, which is that the best way to get a product management job is to build a product. Like, and it's not so easy to do. I mean, I feel your pain. So I think like so first off, the language in your resume needs to read like a product management resume, right? So like any task that you did, that you feel, if you do truly feel as though your work is aligned with the work of a product manager, reframe that to sound like a product manager's line item in a resume, right? So like, things like delivered, deployed, tested. You have to look for like product manager buzzwords. You can probably find product manager sample resumes online, but framing all of your experiences in the context of what a product manager do. So if you're like saying you're released beta version of blah 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 to whatever, it's like release minimum viable product. Just using those buzzwords there. So I think line items got to read like that. You can just de-emphasize titles, right? Like those can be very small, and like the product name is what you're emphasizing. You can do, if you're applying to, if you're looking for new jobs, it sounds like what you're right? If you're looking for new jobs, you can try like weird, unconventional things in your resume, like maybe don't put job title, like the title of your role, and just put like the product you're working on and the things you've worked on. Ultimately, all that resume needs to do is get you in the door, and then once they start talking to you and interviewing you, that's when you've got to sound and feel to them like a product manager. You know, and I think that's one of the hardest pieces, that when people are trying to transition into product, oh, I'm doing this and now I'm trying to do product management, it's clear that you come off as like trying to get into the position. And I think what many hiring managers, product management, people who are hiring product managers want to see is that they want to see that someone has already done it and already knows how to do it before they hire that person, right? Because like, why would you hire someone for this type of role who you're not confident can do the role properly? So if you're trying to convince them that you can do it the whole time, the whole interview, they're going to be like, well, why is he or she convincing me? I want someone who actually has already done it. So it needs to be framed as, I am a product manager. I am doing this product management work. I have a product management mindset. I talk like a product manager. I think like a product manager, and you can feel that in the interview with me. But I think in a practical sense, like playing around with your resume a little bit, playing around with LinkedIn options, and like how you can sort of frame things in different ways. But if your product, those line items got to scream product, you know. And it's also like, if you're in a small startup, like you could potentially ask, like, hey, do you mind if I change my role? Like, you can't do that at a big company like Boeing, because it's like, well, that's, you know, all this paperwork and stuff. But maybe at a start, you know, a smaller company, maybe that's possible. So.
Yeah, and then one thing to add is just taking on those responsibilities at work. It sounds like you're already doing it. Taking on more of the product management role, you know, post-launch and managing the backlog, speaking to users, just gaining the experience even more than what you're doing now, with an eye on product management, I think would be helpful. And
if you're already doing that stuff, it's framing it in the way that a product manager would frame it. Yeah.
Awesome. So a hand back here previously. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jean. I'm a UX designer on Kubernetes. And building on kind of what you were talking about, also I have no desire to be a PM. He's right back here. He's for me. Now. So I want to do less product management. But I think building on that line of questioning, people that do want to do PM stuff, what's the kind of ratio of your deliverables and responsibilities? As a UX designer, I see like the corner of things where it's like, oh, there's PRD documents, and I see they go figure out who the early adopters are for my projects, and I know they're doing something over there with engineers, and then they're writing blog articles when things like release. But that's probably the tip of the iceberg of, can you tell me more about all the types of responsibilities and materials you're creating?
Like the different artifacts that we produce?
I think both the artifacts and the ratio of responsibilities to artifacts that you find in your role. So I know some.
What's an example of or if you were to frame ratio to responsibility to artifact, what would be the?
For example, I spend 50% of my day in meetings and emails, or just unblocking my engineering team, and 50% of my time writing blog articles about products that are going to be launched, creating systems diagrams, and
okay, got it. Okay.
So it was a two-part question, just to make sure everyone kind of understood that. The first part is, what are the product management deliverables or artifacts? And number two, how much of your day is allocated to making those artifacts, but also other activities that fall outside of those deliverables?
Maybe we can do this together. So, writing user stories is definitely an important part of the day. I guess I'll go back to do the ratios. Managing stakeholders, meetings, emails, presentations potentially around that stuff. Communicating with other teams, like integrations, creating alignment sort of technically. Unblocking the team is something you mentioned. What else?
Alignment takes forever. That becomes major chunk of the work, alignment and unblocking teams, because there are so many whose who's who in the zoo is that you take forever in getting all of this streamlined. But as a product manager from Artifact standpoint, first getting the business case up so that you kind of establish the baseline for where you are trying to do, why you are trying to do, and what your success metric is going to be. And then what does, at high level, those feature set looks like. And then identifying those stakeholders, identifying those exec sponsors, identifying who your influencers are going to be from your user segment, identifying what's the metric, from where is the metric going to come from, and what are those key metrics going to be. Yeah. So kind of creating that business case, and depending upon how big of the product that you're talking about, it can consume a lot of time in first getting that up and running. And once you have that up and running, and then getting alignment and sign off from different stakeholders that this is what you guys, and that also is not easy because the more stakeholders that you go to, the different viewpoint you get, and then, so kind of finding that balance, right? That where do you have to say, okay, we have to now call it timeout because there is an end goal, we have to be live by this time. If our business case is not ready by this time, we won't be able to hit that timeline. And then after that is officially, that has become official, then you start working on those, breaking those features down to user stories, then prioritizing the backlog, and then working with, if there is a program manager, you work with the program manager, or oftentimes a product manager's role is the extension, the program manager role is extension of product management. So you work with different teams, UX team, and engineering team, and analytics team, upstream and downstream systems, those integration points, making sure that all that schedule comes together and things, balls are rolling in different directions. So kind of maintaining that weekly status, making sure the teams are aware, there are no surprises for the stakeholders and even for the teams that you're working with. So kind of, once you have that business case, features and user stories, prioritized backlog, it's mostly about keeping the ball rolling in the forward direction, and which is very time consuming.
I'm trying to, so I think that the artifacts and the time spent on the artifacts changes depending on where you are in the product life, the product's life cycle. So like, we do something called a discovery and framing, which is basically an exploration of the problem and of the users, stakeholders, business needs, etc. So like, in that case, there's going to be a ton of documentation, user research documentation, consolidating all those findings, like a lot of sticky notes and just sort of all this disparate information that needs to be consolidated into sort of some sort of centralized documentation. So during like a discovery and framing, I think you're probably spending like 20% of your time, 30% of your time with managing stakeholders, and I'm going to give you a more ideal. I'm going to 20 to 30%, I think, managing stakeholders, emails, meetings, things like that, keeping people aligned. Think maybe 30 to 40% on ideally user research and working with designers on user research. And then I think there's a component of that which is sort of like this and that, which I don't even know what that, but something there. I think as you move into development you spend more of your time on writing user stories. So writing user stories doesn't necessarily it can take a long time. I think writing user stories is like 25, 30% of your time ideally. A lot of time is spent on deciding what you need to, what sort of functionality or value you want to provide. So I do like a lot of in terms of artifacts, like right now we have like on a whiteboard like a whole list of all the epics and all the sort of stories associated with them, and so that takes a lot of time as like an artifact, but thinking through things and the prioritization of things, thinking through sort of the cascading effect of different product lines. So that's sort of an artifact that isn't maybe to take a picture or something, but it is a form of an artifact. And then once you move into execution, I think there's also a significant amount of time, 40 to 50%, on stakeholder interaction and this integration. So that's a lot of emails, and the artifact, I guess, are meetings. And there's a lot of time working with the team, answering questions, clarifying stories, accepting stories, right? Accepting and or rejecting stories and having conversations. There's also the whole process of sort of like pointing stories and communicating the value of different stories in sort of a controlled environment to your team. Or like, here's what we're going to be working on. We call it iterative planning meeting is what we call it. But that whole process of like getting stories ready for developers, putting them in the backlog, making sure everyone understands, getting all the what we call comps, or sort of like all the information ready from designers to put into the user stories. To me, the main artifact a product manager makes is the user story. And I think business related things. I'm writing a proposal right now. You know, it's currently 9 pages. I spent like 30% of my time on it, I think, 20%. Does that help you? It's a little...
No, that's great.
Okay.
I was trying to ask that question more so as I think about in UX design on panels, like what's the thing that people that want to become UX designers, what do they need to understand about the day-to-day things? So I was hoping asking that type of question will help other people that are aspiring to be product managers to understand the types of deliverables maybe they can work on.
Your deliverables for someone who wants to move into UX or someone who wants to move into product? Oh, into product.
That's super helpful, because I think a lot of that is invisible, right?
Yeah.
To other roles. If you've worked in companies and you don't have true product management experience, you don't realize all of those things that you're doing.
But as when I mentor those people who are aspiring PMs, I encourage them, and from different fields like UX and other, go and hang out with them, right? Those different functions, go for a coffee with them and talk to them. Just nudge them a little bit. What do they do? What their functions are? And so that will enlighten you at least that how that whole process works. So just being curious, they are teammates, and it will provide you the transparency. And in fact, that also helps. In whatever role you are, also getting the transparency helps you in doing your job better. So that helps you where you fit in that big puzzle. And that also helps you, empowers you in doing your job better. So I encourage that for anybody. In whatever role I am, there was this huge analytics tool that they launched, and we all were sent the link to go and play with the tool, but I needed more information, and from where we were coming, what was the thinking, why this kind of tool, and what was the UI, and then I set up some time with that BI person, and she just gave me and she was more than happy. She just felt like, wow, you reached out to me and asked me to provide you this kind of, and my team then later were asking questions, and I was like, okay, I'll schedule a session. It's not hard, and we should always, people are more open, it's just that you have to reach out to them, and it will open doors for you and provide you more transparency and clarity. Yeah,
I think, and we, just one more piece is that, so what we're trying to do at Boeing is co-locate teams as often as possible. So I would encourage that. If it's like, well, we work in a different building or whatever, but to go to say to the product team you're delivering, you know, comps to or whatever it is as a designer, to go to that team or whoever it is trying to get into whatever role it is, to go to those teams and say, do you guys mind if I work here? You know, work in an empty desk for a day. And just to get a feel for how things are, how these teams work, to build empathy for these teams. I feel like a lot of times people sitting together, oh, you know, it's just things start to come together. And it just clarifies a lot.
Yeah, no, that's huge for Microsoft too, as the teams they're so diversified, and they're trying to also bring teams together, not just engineering sits here, business sits here, US, no, just one. The team that are working on one specific piece or one specific set of customers on one specific product, all the teams need to be together, because that co-location helps a lot.
I know we've deviated from your question a little bit, but it's also that I think it helps. So like, it's interesting because I feel like when UX designers come and work with the product teams, they start to understand like the ramifications of the formatting of their comps. Comps are like the design, what does it stand for, comp, do you know?
Probably composition.
Composition, that's right. It's basically the artifact, thank you, that's used to communicate to the developers like what we're trying to build visually. But I've even seen situations where when those designers come and sit with the teams, it's like, oh, like it's really difficult for them to use zip files, or oh, they prefer the link online, or oh, JPEGs really don't work on their Linux machines, or whatever it is. But so all of that, I think, helps facilitate better communication, and that makes better products.
Can I follow up on something?
Yeah.
Because one of the things that the biggest challenges my teams have had hasn't so much been in the projects, it's been after the projects. So what happens with UX typically is we get thrown into another one and we have no idea what happened. So I'm really curious as a product manager, you have KPIs and you have things you want to measure and you launch the product. What do you do? What are like the actions you take and what do you focus on once the product has been launched?
I didn't quite get the question.
So after the product launches, you have
Right.
specific KPIs that you want to measure
Right.
to identify success, right? Let me say it differently. How much time do you actually put in identifying or measuring that success? Or do you just jump onto the next project too?
So it depends upon the products that I have worked on. Either there are subsequent cycles, so you have just launched MVP and now you have the other release, or you may have launched alpha and beta and then the general availability GA is coming up, depending upon what that product cycle looks like. And also at the same time, so as a product manager, you have to keep an eye on both. The product also needs to continue to develop and grow and become richer in features. At the same time, you have to integrate the feedback that's coming in as you are thinking about the next set of features. But it is extremely critical and it is always built in the plan to how to gather that information or the success metric. Either it is number of downloads or number of views or whatever success metric that you're going to look at, that for this set of audience we are expecting this is how it should change, or the reduction in time that they take in doing some kind of work that they're doing.
So that sounds like it's really agile, heavily agile focused, right? You're talking iterative releases,
Yes.
Yes.
MVP, and you eventually evolve it.
I mean, if you're doing waterfall software development, theoretically in waterfall, at the end of building the thing, it's done. You've done what you need to do, and you move on to the next thing. In a practical sense, that doesn't. There's software has a lot of incredible benefits that you don't necessarily need to work in that same construct. I would agree. It depends on the product. Typically, I don't think your product manager is releasing and moving off. Like the truth, at least for me, all that feedback that comes back, like that's what you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, was I right? Is I wrong? You know what I mean? Like, what actually happens here, and then what can we do to sort of push up those numbers? And I think that, different companies work in different ways, but I think that the most responsible way if product management moved off, someone else, there needs to be a context exchange. And I would, in an ideal world, I think with design, it's the same thing, right? It's like there's so much information that's behind these designs, these UIs, these information art, all of this stuff that's based in very hopefully rich user research. So hopefully having, even if it's documentation, to provide all that context, or if it's a conversation, provide that context. I get it, it's, real life and that doesn't always happen. But yeah, I would think that, my experience is that I'm not just rolling off immediately, that I'm staying there for some period of time, and that if there is going to be a transition, that is done.
Somebody else is going to hold the baton.
Right, someone comes in and, there's a period of transition and then you'll roll off.
Companies are moving away from one and done
Yeah.
concept. They are in that process of continuous improvement,
Yes.
and they want to make sure that that is built in the plan, that we are not going to just go live with this and just call it done, because that's the worst user experience that you can provide. Then you should rather not even do it.
And it's you take on a huge amount of risk doing it that way.
Yeah, and it's different across disciplines too, though.
Yes.
Working with developers and designers on a very close cadence, a lot of times my designers will rotate out.
Mm-hmm.
So even though you launched the MVP as a designer, you may then get pulled off to do another MVP,
Yeah.
and they bring in someone else for the phase 2.
Other things.
Right. Yeah. So I think there's, to your question, there is still that I don't want to say waterfall mentality of the one and done for other disciplines, but I think it's a little less so with product management, as we tend to be owning something for multiple releases.
I think I was leading the question a little bit, to be honest. It's because there's often a situation where people don't see the results of what they've done.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really, I think, where the question I meant to go.
And that is
Right.
what is also changing. So now when you are building these business cases, leadership really wants to see that how you are going to measure success of this. We understand there is a lot of value in this, but we still want to see how you are going to measure success for this, so that we can validate in the direction that we are going. So there is a push yes, I agree, there is not a standard and people still, or the company is not necessarily, it was a huge change in Microsoft. Let's just say that the company that I have experience with, I think that newer companies may already be on that path, but with traditional company, it doesn't come because money was never a problem and they did not know how to define a complex environment, how to even define those success metric and who's going to measure it, who's going to take the ownership for it, and then it was more like a personal, sometimes people thought of it as a personal attack, right? That, oh, okay, I said that it is going to be adopted by 50,000 people, but what if it is adopted by only 25,000? Does it reflect bad on me?
Right.
I think that's right, that there's, with software especially, there's ways to measure things and to keep track of things in an automated way oftentimes, and I think that changes the game a lot. Because before it's like you have to go out and audit it or whatever, it's very cumbersome to figure it out.
Yes.
And now it's relatively cheap to build something and relatively cheap to see how it's doing.
And even now it has become table stakes. Like it has to be built in the plan. How are you going to measure success? Whenever you are even thinking about that product, it has to be in your plan how you are going to measure success for this.
Yeah.
Because leadership wants to see those numbers, good or bad, but they just want to see it.
And often, and to your point, a lot of times as a product manager, we publish these numbers upward to leadership because they're the ones that are itching to get their hands on it, but we don't always disseminate that information across and down. So I think there's also an opportunity for to reach out to your product manager and say, hey, I think these metrics exist somewhere, like would you mind sharing them? Because they probably went up but didn't go down or across.
And you hit on a very good point. So across a lot of functions, this question is not asked. People, professionals in different segments, which they have full right to ask, but they do not ask. Whenever, even if I approach even dev team, if they don't ask me, I make that they are aware of this, that this is why we are doing it, this is the success metric. And oftentimes it was a lot of coaching that I had to do, is that ask question, what you are working on, why you are working on it, how is it moving the needle in the organization. Don't do it if it doesn't align to what the leadership, what that long-term vision or goal is. But it is surprising that how people do not even ask that question, which is they have complete right to ask that question, that what are they working on, why they are working on, and how it is changing the needle for the organization.
That's a fantastic point. Yeah, and I encourage everyone, developers, designers, always ask. And the other thing is that if you gain trust with someone, they tend to give you the benefit of the doubt that you know what that KPI is, and then they stop asking. So I think there's, as a designer, as developers in the room, absolutely ask your PMs what their metric is. Like, why are we doing this? Because that will help you be more successful when you're building out the product.
And that's also, I think, as a UI designer or software developers, right? I don't want to do solutioning for you. I want to go with the problem. That I don't think I'm getting enough traction with this, probably whatever visual is there. So do you think we should be changed? I shouldn't be going change this to this. No, that is what you are the professional for that. You know that best. I should be going in. So even if somebody does solutioning for you, you have the right to say, can I have the problem statement?
Right.
What is it that you're trying to solve here? And let us, even if we have to partner in doing the solutioning, let's partner. But it is not for the other person to define the solution for you.
Yeah, I think there's a strong sort of human instinct to solve.
Yes.
And I think that's a great question. Sometimes I think we'll be met with resistance if you say, what's your problem statement? Because I think a lot of times people don't necessarily think about things in terms of problems, they think about things in terms of solutions. Yeah. But I think that's right. I think people, you can do it in a careful way, but trying to get to like, what are we trying to do here? Why are we doing this? Yeah. Hey, and then I potentially have a different solution to this problem.
Exactly.
Can open that conversation.
I had a similar request the other day. Somebody from business came in and they're like, oh, we want these preferences to be changed here and this. And I was like, okay, let's just take a step back. You want all of this to be changed, but why is it so? Right. What made you think that, okay, let's just change that? I'm like, no, but I'm just asking to make these little changes. And I'm like, yes, I can make that, but I will not. Because I first need to understand why you are even asking, because I might be able to propose you a better solution, right. So let's just take a step back and find out what is it that's going on that you're asking us for that change. So still, it's an everyday battle that you have to do, and it's not easy. Again, it's a lot of coaching, guidance to your peers, to your business partners, to different teams that you work with, but then you just have to continue to push that ball in the right direction.
But it is, I think if you can get it down or get relatively confident and feel good about asking that question, it's very empowering because it turns these situations where you're in some ways like the victim of someone else's solution into, you reframe it into, you're more empowered in that situation to flip things around, understand where they're coming from, understand their problem, and then a lot of times propose some other solution or fit things in as a product manager in a way where they're not just sort of shoving it or enforcing it on you, and that it's more of a partnership between the two entities. I think it's a really good point. Yeah, it's not easy to do though.
And we have just a few more minutes left, so I want to go back to one more question just to wrap us up. Thank you all, audience, for fantastic questions. And when we wrap up, feel free to come up and talk to everyone here. Happy to stay a little bit longer and answer other questions. But last question, what's something you're most proud of in your product management career and why?
Yeah.
So I was most proud, so in my career there have been a lot of small successes that I have really been proud of. Sometimes I have met with the right mentors and they have guided me in the right direction, and successes have happened which I'm really grateful for. But the last job that I was in, I was PM lead for this next generation pricing platform for Microsoft Enterprise Services. It's like $3.5 billion business to be used in 191 countries. So starting from, bringing from the concept to getting into Foundation, launching it into 8 countries, working on readiness and landing, working on hypercare, getting that end-to-end view of a global platform, launching that to our target audience and seeing how it changed their life, because what they were using before was making them miserable, and how it transformed and made that experience so much better for them. They were able to serve more customers. They were able to get away from doing a lot of administrative day-to-day data entry job. So it's giving them something very powerful in their hands that made them capable of doing and performing their job. Not enhancing the experience, but just making them capable of just doing their job in the full capacity that they can. Was a very powerful, was one of my biggest accomplishments, I would say. I'm very excited about the work that we as a team did there to bring it all together for our sales team across the globe.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing.
I was working with a team in Long Beach, California. We were working on a piece of software for commercial airplanes that Boeing makes, and the organization was doing things in a very waterfall-centric fashion. Were resistive to access to users and things like that, and I worked with them for a significant amount of time, and we finally pushed a minimum viable product to real users who were making configurations on these airplanes, and just seeing that transition from this very isolated organization who was doing things in a very different way, and then being able to shift to this more iterative approach where we're really impacting users on a daily basis. That was really exciting and a very rewarding product experience. The other thing I'll just mention is that recently I've started, part of my product role is teaching other product managers while working on a piece of software together as product managers, and that's been an incredibly rewarding experience. I learned so much from the people I'm teaching, because I'm still always learning, and it's really fun to watch people transition from what is product management to now being the ones in meetings who are convincing stakeholders to do this or that. That transition's really neat. It's difficult, but that's very rewarding too.
That's true.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. That concludes our panel, and again, feel free to come up and ask us questions. Thank you all for joining, and we're looking forward to seeing you in the next one.